So this is, let me just start by saying, this is rumor, 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 rumor. Can I say rumor anymore? This is purely rumor. I don't know how true this is. Okay. This could be totally fictional and not be happening at all. Okay. So everyone's been warned. So we should look at this as fun fiction to speculate on, and that's it. Because there's not a lot of to back this up. But I just found it terribly interesting. I thought it'd be worth taking a minute or two to discuss. So this is coming from the Cultured Nerd. They're saying that this story they have here is exclusive to them, which should make us be even more fearful if it's true or not. But it says HBO Max wants Affleck, Leto, and Manganiello for an original Batman project. Now, this to me sounds like that there's some interest in maybe what Affleck was originally intending to do with his Batman film. Because there's been a lot of talk that Manganiello was supposed to play Deathstroke the Terminator and basically be fighting Batman. That's what Affleck's script was all about. And when I originally heard it, I wasn't too keen on it, but I did warm to the idea quite a bit. So I thought, it's worth interesting to talk about. And so this story here is from TJ Bravo. And they posted this, actually looks like today. I just found this really interesting. So it says the bat is not dead, don't bury it. Says sources close to TCN have confirmed that HBO wants Ben Affleck, Jared Leto, and Joe Manganiello for an original Batman project. This follows reports last week that AT&T and Warner Media want Affleck to return as the Cape Crusader, and I'd heard that on a lot of different projects, to be honest. Affleck is also in talks to return to the director's chair and to adapt his original script with Zack Snyder producing. So this builds on the release the Snyder Cut idea, obviously, and there is this groundswell of people who quite enjoyed some of the DCEU films and wanting to see the whatever they originally intended to see that actually come to fruition. There's a big movement right now. There's a group of people that they want to see the original version of what Suicide Squad was supposed to be. What the director had originally intended versus the film that we actually got. And there's even been some talk, too, that even the director of Birds of Prey has discussed the fact that they had some issues with Birds of Prey with, Warner execs and whatever meddling with the production. At the end of the day, they are paying the bills. So they do get to make the decisions. That's, sort of the battle as a creative professional is trying to maintain your creative vision and see your idea through, even when people at times seem to be working against you. So it says here, the return of Affleck's Batman will either be a miniseries or a DC film on HBO Max, as Warner Brothers is committed to Matt Reeves' The Batman trilogy in theaters. Affleck's project will likely follow the intended storyline teased by the post-credits scene of Justice League or Zack Snyder's Justice League. So again, we should look upon this purely as rumor. I don't know how much stock you could put into this, but I thought it'd be something interesting to bring up because I've heard a lot of different discussion and excitement kind of surrounding the Zack Snyder cut and the possibility that there could be sort of like this DCEU thing happening on HBO Max for those people that are into it. Well, let me just tell you right now, this is further ammo for me to sign up for HBO Max when it actually happens. Okay. Notice I said when it actually happens, because that's kind of the problem. It's like, I love the idea of the Zack Snyder cut, but I don't feel like shelling out that money right now when there is no Zack Snyder cut of Justice League to go watch. Now, if this comes to fruition, I'm very interested to see this. I remember when Ben Affleck was teasing that leaked footage of Manganiello or possibly even a stuntman in the Deathstroke suit, and he's walking out of that aircraft. It looked like, in all honesty, that bat plane thing that they were using actually in Justice League. It looked like Deathstroke was actually walking off the ramp. And at the time, I'd heard all these crazy rumors that Batman actually had Deathstroke the Terminator helping him run down leads to actually assemble the Justice League, that the Batman had actually hired him. And so when Manganiello's character actually shows up later and he's talking to Lex Luthor, part of the reason Lex Luthor sought him out is because he knows, or he's been sort of like a double agent and been gathering information for Lex Luthor about what Batman is doing or what Bruce Wayne is doing, essentially. So we'll have to see, because all that sounds really interesting. And then, for example, there's all this talk that Suicide Squad, there's these rumors going around that was Suicide Squad that was actually supposed to happen, is that the big villain at the end of the movie is not really just supposed to be Enchantress and her brother, but that they were actually supposed to bring or somehow cause Steppenwolf to actually come into our world, and it was going to help set up the events more directly for Justice League, for example. And then when they decided to abandon some of what they were doing in Justice League, they decided just to scrap all of that. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But if HBO Max decides to put some money in this, get Ben Affleck back in the director's chair, get him back in the bat suit, and actually, get the opportunity to take his original Batman idea and film it, I'd love to see it. I was very curious to see what Ben Affleck was going to do with it. I think he's a talented filmmaker, and I've enjoyed a lot of his films. I still talk about The Town. The Town's a great movie. I really liked Argo. I know he's a big Batman fan, so I would be curious to see what his idea of a Batman movie is. So if it turns out to happen, I'm down. If it's just all rumor, well, it was fun to discuss for a few minutes this evening. So what do you think about this crazy rumor, Eric, this idea that HBO Max may or may not, be looking to actually assemble this, killer's row of people to help bring Ben Affleck's Batman script maybe to life?
I don't think this is surprising at all. I think that this is exactly how things are done in Hollywood. They leak things like that to see what kind of reaction they get. And this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening in the wake of the Snyder Cut. So what I could kind of see, and I didn't know about this story until you brought it up, but what I can see is this idea of a Snyderverse. So I can see that if the Snyder Cut is successful and does what HBO Max is hoping that it's going to do, the DCEU can remain in the theaters because that is actually doing well. Wonder Woman did well. Aquaman did well. Birds of Prey didn't, but Birds of Prey is whatever. It is what it is. But I think that they recognize that the DCEU, the direction that it's in, I think they're okay with. And what they're looking at is, on HBO Max, could we have our own version of the DCEU? And for lack of a better term, the Snyderverse. So that's the scenario I'm seeing right here. To me, it's all laid out. The blueprint is very obvious. Is that if the Snyder Cut is successful and tons of people come in, and get HBO Max to get the Snyder Cut, and it does really well, and the fans love it, then totally I could see them doing something like this and bringing Ben Affleck's Batman back and doing this whole thing. And again, it would be basically the Snyderverse, and it would be HBO Max's own DC property. You know what I mean? It would be, because we talked about that last week. There's all sorts of huge omissions of DC content on HBO Max because of DC Universe. So DC Universe has all that stuff, and HBO Max has virtually nothing as far as the wide catalog of DC properties, because most of it's on DC Universe. They're competing with themselves. And so this makes perfect sense. HBO just basically they're basically kind of like the CW. They have their own DC Universe on the CW. This would be like, cinema quality, DC Universe for HBO Max, because DC does this all the time. This is what Time Warner does. I don't understand it. I've never understood it. I like the MCU model better, and I am a DC guy. I prefer the DC characters over the Marvel characters, but I love what Disney has done with the MCU. And what Marvel Studios started and Disney has continued, where they integrate everything together. Even the Netflix shows had references to the battle in New York and all that kind of stuff. That it all ties in together. S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually on tonight, which is crazy to me that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is still going on ABC. And technically that falls within the continuity of the Marvel movies as well. But DC doesn't do that, or I should say Time Warner doesn't do that. Or should I say AT&T doesn't do that? Depends on how you look at it, right? Who the overlord is right now. But they don't do that. Gotham had nothing to do with the CW shows. In fact, the CW shows didn't have anything to do with Supergirl at first, because Supergirl was on a different network and didn't come to the CW until later. And then, of course, Supergirl is technically in a different universe than the other CW characters, because the CW with Flash introduced the whole multiverse thing. And so it's like, yeah, Time Warner keeps doing this. So I can totally see this. I can totally see this is the beginning of the Snyderverse. If the Snyder Cut does well, HBO Max is going to have their own DC universe.
And just to back up what you were saying about CW, the Crisis event basically put them all in the same universe. So Supergirl,
when it first came out, Supergirl was on a different network. It was not part of the CW at all. It wasn't until it got canceled, I think it was on CBS, they moved it to the CW, then they incorporated it into Flash, but still she was in a different universe than Flash was. When Flash meets Supergirl, because I saw that, you know, he's like, oh, who are you? Well, who are you? You know what I mean? Because they're from different universes. And then, of course, like, I didn't watch the Crisis event, but you did, and we covered it on the show. So I know what happened, you know, but what I'm saying is that's what DC does, just like Gotham. Gotham had nothing to do with the CW or Supergirl or the movies or any of that stuff. It was just off on its own, you know what I mean, on doing its own little thing. And that's the same way that, you know, Time Warner does that. That's what they've always done. It feels like that's what they're always going to do. And it just makes complete sense to me that they would want to create their own DC universe on HBO Max. And then they don't have to deal with any of that. Like, so DC Universe can be doing its thing. CW can be doing its thing. You know what I mean? Because that's just the way they operate. They've always operated that way. And then the movies can be doing their thing.
Right. And then James does bring up a comment. He says, rumor, Dave, with a question mark. And yes, James, like I said, this is purely rumor. This is and a little bit of speculation. Like I said, I don't know how much I'd put into this. I mean, if this is coming from Variety or Deadline or something, I'd be like, wow, this must be really happening in some form. But I also know, like Eric was just talking about, a lot of times they leak these things on purpose because they want people to talk about, to see how much interest there could be in this potential project. Because, you know, the HBO Max thing is so interesting because basically they launched without a lot of unique original content exclusive just to their service. They just launched with a bunch of stuff that previously a bunch of other people had. They just kind of took it all back. So they don't even have a Mandalorian show that they can hang their shingle on, as far as I know. I know they do have a few things that they're doing, but it's not catching on or causing a lot of attention. I see more people complaining about Space Force still than I hear them talking about HBO Max. So, you know, and Space Force is on Netflix. So there you go. There's Netflix still winning at the end of the day. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I personally had heard a lot about what was going on with Ben Affleck's Batman project for some different people that I kind of knew. And everything that was getting back to me had me excited to see it. So then all of a sudden overnight, it just kind of all came to a screeching halt. It was just like, what? They've spent a lot of time developing all this. They've been shooting test footage. Like, what do you mean they're not doing it? You know? Like I said, I would love to see what Ben Affleck's intention was, you know, for his Batman script. I personally would just like to see what he intended to do. And like Eric said, if they do their own Snyderverse that exists on HBO Max, I don't think that's any harm nor foul. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just its own little thing. It sits over here with the Zack Snyder version of Justice League. You know, those people who enjoy it and want to discover it, well, here you go. You know, it only costs X amount of dollars per month to go check it out, you know? So I don't know. We'll have to see. And then there's been all kinds of crazy rumors. I didn't want to get into them swirling around about the Matt Reeves Batman project. It has me a little concerned. And then there's, of course, all the insanity going on with Batwoman, which I was going to bring up during the pop culture news segment, but I decided, for sake of time. I don't know how far I want to get into that, but and then that's unfortunate too. I think we actually broke that in the last episode where we talked about Ruby Rose actually leaving Batwoman. But now there's all this crazy stuff that they're not going to recast someone to play Kate Kane. There's talk that they're just going to bring in some other character, and that person's just going to assume the mantle of Batwoman, kind of like what they did with Firestorm. And
I saw that. I saw an article on that as well, by the way. That they're just going to it's going to be a new character.
Yeah, it's going to be its own thing, which is fine, but I talked about that in the last episode too, that how I felt that was kind of unfortunate because the version of Firestorm that exists in Legends of Tomorrow, I don't remember if I talked about that here on the show or I talked about that. I might have talked about that because I did an interview over the weekend. Maybe it was during that interview I did over the weekend. But I had talked about the fact because someone had asked me how I felt about Firestorm and Legends of Tomorrow. And I said that it was kind of fun to see Firestorm and Legends of Tomorrow for the brief period that it was a version of Firestorm that I had any association with whatsoever. I said, but by the time that they were done, the version of Firestorm that was on Legends of Tomorrow was an interesting character, but it wasn't Jason Rush, nor was it Ronnie Raymond. So I didn't have a lot of interesting insight on that character. It was its own unique thing just to Legends of Tomorrow, even though he was bonded with Professor Martin Stein. So I don't know. That's the thing that's interesting. The DC stuff is definitely a mess compared to how Marvel is able to kind of get all their ducks in a row and connect things and have things kind of play through on ideas and always build. They're always building on their own universe, which is really interesting. But then, use the multiverse excuse or whatever, DC is not afraid at the end of the day to just throw things at the wall. But it's so funny because it wasn't always like that. You roll back the hands of time just a few years ago, and there was literally mandates that would have prevented any of this stuff from happening. You would not have characters referencing Batman in a direct way on a CW show when you had Batman films in active production that were going to be coming to theaters. It would not have allowed that. So I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what their eventual thought is. So yeah, like I said, I thought it'd be interesting to bring up to discuss. So, because like I said, it is mostly rumor. So,
well, Bobby Chambers says seeing a separate DC run could work. Marvel had great success on Netflix. Just replace Leto with Defoe, and I'm sold. I am not a fan of Leto's Joker at all. I hate his Joker. That's just my personal opinion. I do not like that version of the Joker at all.
Well, and there's a lot of, in all honesty, Bobby, there's a lot of people that could bring into play the Joker for this particular production. I think a lot of people would welcome the opportunity. So we'll have to wait and see. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even know, even after reading this, I don't even know how much interest Leto would have for coming back to even play the Joker at this point, considering some of the things that we heard was being said in the wake of Joaquin Phoenix's Joker movie.
Yeah, the rumor is that he was pretty upset about that. He was totally sidelined, and that he was pretty butthurt. He was pretty upset about that whole situation, and in some ways, I can actually understand that. From a business angle, and from him being an actor and him thinking that this is going to be his part for a while, and he would get at least like one shot. You know what I mean? To really play the Joker on his own in a film. I think that's kind of what they led him to believe because of what we're looking at right now. This idea that maybe the Ben Affleck Batman would come back and Leto would play the Joker. I think that was the original plan. I just think that the reception was lukewarm at best. A lot of people hated him as the Joker, and I think that's why they went in a completely different direction, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, the direction they went in, I thought we reviewed the Joker, and I think that's an awesome film, and it was totally the right way to go. But it is what it is. So could they try to bring him back in this scenario? Could they mend some fences? It's possible. Hey, if the money's right, if the money's right, it could totally happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then let's see here in the comments. Peggy is talking about some of the different shows.
Well, she did mention this. I thought was interesting because she was talking about Supergirl being part of the same universe, which we already mentioned, and she said sorry for spoiling that, but we already talked about that anyway. We did mention that Supergirl is part of that universe now. He says, but I was reading that because of how bad Green Lantern did, that actually influenced Arrow, and they couldn't call him the Green Arrow for 4 years, and the Flash went to visit the Lantern's hometown, but couldn't mention him at all, which is interesting. The idea that because I hadn't heard that because the movie performed so badly that there was some sort of a ban on even saying Green Arrow. Although I will point out, some people miss it, but it stuck out to me when they in Justice League they do mention lanterns. In fact, and there's obviously a reference to one of the other Green Lanterns fighting in that big battle from antiquity. There's clearly a Green Lantern type person. There's clearly like a Captain Marvel, Shazam type of figure that were involved in this ancient battle with who's the villain in Justice League?
Steppenwolf.
Steppenwolf. That there was a fight with him, and there's obviously a Green Lantern there, and there's obviously someone that was related to Shazam. You know what I mean? So those figures are obviously there, but I don't think. But they say lanterns. I think they even that's the term they use. Like they say no lanterns, and they don't say no Green Lanterns. They say no lanterns.
Yeah. Which to me it makes sense. I don't know that they would say no Green Lanterns. The fact that they would just say no lanterns here, because you have to remember that in the wake of Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern, which was so great, there's more than just the Green Lantern now. There are all these other lanterns that power all these different aspects and entities that kind of harken back to, for those of you who are not terribly familiar with the DC universe, harken back to the similar concepts that they played with the Infinity Stones in the Marvel movies. It's a similar kind of idea, which the DC version of that idea, in extent or not, is in some ways even older. But no, it'll be interesting to see. But I remember actually when they had, I think it was in one of the movie trailers, he actually makes that comment. Steppenwolf says, "No lanterns here." And so that's because the lanterns obviously are the sort of like the intergalactic space force. They are the protectors, of the universe. They're the ones that make sure things don't get out of hand on all these different planets. So I hope that they'll introduce the Green Lanterns, into all of this. I've heard all kinds of crazy rumors that there was supposed to be a lantern more kind of obvious in the Zack Snyder version of Justice League. So we'll just have to wait and see what comes out of all of this. But it'll be interesting. And DC, well, not DC so much, but Warner's is at times they can be a little reactionary to things. I think that's pretty obvious now. I think everyone's kind of seen them do that in real time with some of these movies. So we'll see what actually comes of it. But I like the idea of being able to see this because I was very curious, because I do think of all the characters that Batman could square off against, I think Deathstroke makes an interesting foil because in some ways they are somewhat similar. And it would be interesting to see that showdown kind of go down between the two of them in a live action film.